I think that it goes without saying that words are important, but have you ever stopped to consider how they even make sense at all? How are you able to see or hear a random group of sounds and symbols and at the same time clearly understand what they mean? Or maybe not. To talk about how words don't make any sense, we first have to go back to how they do in structuralism, a literary and linguistic theory relating to understanding the underlying structures defining how we perceive, think, and feel through language. Revolutionized by Swiss theorist Ferdinand de Saussure. His 1916 work, The Course in General Linguistics, gained attention for highlighting what would be known as some of the most fundamental aspects of structuralist then deconstructionist theory, the concept of the sign and then the idea of binary opposition. But what exactly is a sign? To Saussure, it is the way that we interpret and then convey meaning using the information that we take in around us within our minds. It's made up of two parts, like the two sides of a coin or the sides of the sheet of paper. And as Robert Parker puts it in How to Interpret Literature, language is known as one big system of signs, with a sign consisting of a sound image, which he calls a signifier, and a concept that the sound image represents, which he calls a signified. In other words, if I come up to you and say any given word, I'm sure you'll start to think about certain images, objects, or memories that you relate to that word, probably without even realizing it. These two concepts, an idea for something and our representation for it, are strongly bonded together with both of them being a necessary part of our meaning-making process. Except for one thing. Despite the importance that the two have within our lives, the link between them is also completely arbitrary. The signified and the signifier are never truly connected, meaning that while we think that certain words have a concrete connection to specific objects, they really don't. Words are randomly used to apply meaning to things depending on the context of the situation all the time. We can have multiple meanings for the same word and multiple words that have the same meaning, not to mention the many different languages that all describe the same idea. This is where Algerian-French philosopher Jacques Derrida coins the term deconstruction, a pushback to structuralist ideas by saying that meanings are multiple and that even seemingly stable or singular meanings for the things that we think about can change or become lost in translation when trying to describe them using language. We can never really know the true meaning of something that was said or written because everybody will interpret it differently. Even though when I think of the word cat, I see this cat, I guarantee that you're thinking of a cat that looks different. You have your own signified for the word cat, and so does everybody else, making the meaning for the word cat endless. A multiplicity of meaning. This gap between the signified and the signifier, given the term différance by Derrida, doesn't just apply to interpretation, but also to the illusion of binary structures that so heavily dictate our view of life and society. We often think about things as being either one way or another. In a world in which language is so vague and unsuccessful in describing meaning, Saussure believed that through our tendency to rely on the differences between certain things from others, we construct these binary oppositions to help us interpret the world. However, Derrida believed that all they truly are constructions. It's much easier for us to divide things into two categories when we have to find the differences between them rather than go through the many that they could fall into, leading oppositional binary to become a natural way of thinking that is dominating our cultural sphere. I know that this is a cat because this isn't one, or more specifically a dog. But if I start to think about how the two are alike, and through Derrida's method of collapsing these binaries, I can find that these distinct separations made between the two might not be so distinct after all. But how exactly do you deconstruct something? In breaking down literature, Derrida himself says that in
deconstructing the subject would mean first to analyze historically in a genealogical way, the formation in the different layers which have built, so to speak, the concept.
He does this by performing a double reading on a work of text, first presenting a singular structured interpretation, and then trying to find things that contradict or undermine the structure that was first presented. This can be done when examining a work of literature such as Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, an 1850 Puritan romance novel about Hester Prynne, who, having had her daughter with the town's pastor out of wedlock, is publicly humiliated and scorned for the crime of adultery, with a big letter A permanently sewn onto her clothes. In the first reading, it seems pretty clear how centered Hawthorne is in instilling the structural binary system within his character's world. As the Puritans were often known for their violent punishment and religious intolerance, Hawthorne questions his own Puritan ancestry in his writing, wondering whether his ancestors bethought themselves to repent for their sins while also acknowledging those same traits within himself. And if anyone knew anything about an intolerance for sin and religion, it was the Puritans. The theme of the Puritan sermon is that you're either doing God or the devil's work. There is nothing outside the either or and nothing in between, already creating a rigid binary between between being holy and unholy. Since the townspeople were described as those amongst whom religion and law were almost identical, this can also extend into the binary of law versus lawlessness. This binary is especially upheld in the anxiety Dimmesdale and Hester feel while hiding their unholy secret. The narrator mentioning that no man can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which may be the true, showing that the two can exist at the same time and forcing a choice between them. Hester can never escape her label due to her sin, further imposing the binary that she can't break free of. Lawlessness to the Puritans is anything that isn't Christianity, like the savage wild Indian in his woods or Pearl's entire existence. The wilderness is where Doc Chillingworth gains knowledge on native medicine, where the witch Mistress Hibbins goes to practice dark magic, and where Hester takes off the Scarlet Letter. All the things that the Puritans considered savage, unholy, and lawless. Considering the author's Puritan past and what's in the text, structuralist binaries seem to be strong in this story, except when we try to collapse them. Just because Hester is labeled a sinner, is she really a bad person? We can see that she is described in a positive light and lived out her life as a compassionate member of the community, the very opposite of what her label makes her out to be. Meanwhile, Dimmesdale, the very religious figure that is supposed to be the epitome of the holy word in the town, has sinned, yet never has to face the same harsh consequences Hester does, despite spending most of his time haunted by the sin. Hester herself deconstructs the sinner-saint binary by questioning the morals of the others in the town, proving them to be less distinct from Hester than the binary would suggest. And as far as signifiers go, the only reason that everyone knows that Hester is a sinner is because of her signifier, the Scarlet A, which we assume stands for adultery. But considering how this isn't stated anywhere in the actual text, and how some people in the town don't even know what it represents, what it signifies isn't as apparent as it seems. In fact, over time the symbol even changes to take on a more positive message, a signifier of Hester's ability and a symbol of her calling as a good person. But this doesn't mean that Hawthorne completely disregards signs altogether, instead further exploring the binaries that he creates and testing what exactly they signify. At the end, he even questions whether love and hate, the very emotions that lead the characters throughout the novel, be not the same thing at the bottom, ultimately making us question the many binaries he has constructed throughout the entire novel, leaving what their signifiers truly represent to be largely ambiguous. Through a simple comparison of cats or dogs, or through diving in a work of text, deconstruction can be a crucial theory for learning how we understand the words we use and how they define our lives. By paying closer attention to the binaries that we follow and actively trying to break them down, we can start to ignore the differences between things and start noticing how much more there is to life than two simple sides. Words are important, even though they really don't make any sense, but through learning more about how we use them, we can start to see signifieds for the signifiers we would have never seen before.